We live with a ban.
We live with a, there you go. What was I saying? What was I saying? What was I saying earlier before we went on to this?
No landmines.
Well,
No, you're explaining something.
It's too much.
what was that?
But you were talking about.
No, you're trying to say some haqq in a good way. Continue.
Well, I forgot it now, alhamdulillah.
I mean, you said
The haqq is that at least Muslims are starting to realize the aqeedah.
You know, well, alhamdulillah, I am optimistic.
Okay.
I am optimistic. Let me say it that way. I am optimistic that the Muslims are right now, yes, they may not recognize, I don't necessarily think that the Muslim Ummah is necessarily recognizing what's actually happening. But one thing is that during the time, although as an Ummah, I think we weren't ready for what was called the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was definitely more of a
Political.
no, it wasn't necessarily political. Well, I mean, absolutely it was, but I think it was,
wake up call.
well, it definitely was a wake-up call. But the Arab Spring was not organized. And what I mean by what was not organized, and where the Arab Spring, you had the masses, yes, they did have that courage to go out, but they weren't necessarily heading towards
The right cause.
the right cause. So it was, I would say, more of a demagogue, in where it was emotional. It was, we just want to bring an end to this type of leadership that's controlling us in a way where it was nothing but dictatorship, etc. But then did they actually have an alternative? Maybe, yes, the Egyptian one was, it kind of went smooth in the beginning and actually went through that type of democratic political change and put in Morsi, etc. But then I think the Western supremacy realized that we cannot have Morsi as a Muslim activist actually be in power, because this is going to curtail all the efforts that we've been doing against any Muslim union. And I think it's really important to recognize through the lens of Quran and Sunnah, and read the political situation through Quran and Sunnah. When we talk about Israel, like I said, Israel is an issue of resembling Western supremacy that is right now finding within the Muslims and the Muslim Union revival, as seeing it as an opponent that is probably going to be coming to some kind of an awareness awakening. And that's why when you see, for example, this base that is right now heading towards the Mediterranean, etc., that it makes no sense that this is actually going for Hamas. Like I said, Hamas is a very small group that doesn't actually require or need this much of a base, really. It's not that, they're not that many for you to actually bring a whole base, which actually tells me that this is not targeting Hamas per se. I believe that this is anticipating that there is going to be a Muslim, or at least an uprising against this Western supremacy in the Middle East, which they did recognize that they did not anticipate of something like an Arab Spring, but they're right now, I believe, fearful that the Arab Spring, or the second type of Arab Spring, is right now going to be a spring against the Western supremacy that is resembled in the existence of Israel. And that's why when you're talking when you're talking about a Muslim uprising in rejecting the Israeli existence or rejecting the Western supremacy that is modeled in Israel, I think it's basically recognizing that that actually means a change in the economical control, a change of who controls a lot of the resources in the Middle East. I think it's recognizing that it's not necessarily wanting to somehow be, you could say that the media was talking about 40 children, beheaded and all of that. And they know very well that that was actually fake news. They know very well that that was fake news. But it was
about the death of kids and everything.
Here's the thing, is that let's not go back too far. When you look at Iraq, they needed the oil. So they basically created a whole agenda of washing and brainwashing the masses to convince them that, that somehow Saddam Hussein actually had links to al-Qaeda and so forth. And therefore, we have to use all the powers. We have to use all those different kind of nuclear bombs in order to basically end all expected terror in Iraq. And it wasn't until later when Tony Blair and all of these people and Bush were actually discovered that they created a lie. But hey, who cares about it now?
Muslims are gone.
Because number one, it was really the oil that mattered. Even when you go back, Madeleine Albright was asked, you got a million children were actually killed. 1 million people were killed. What does that actually mean? Is it really worth it? And she said, yeah, you better believe it's worth it. To her, it definitely was worth it. Why? Well, because you got Condoleezza Rice, you had all of them, because it's an issue of wanting Western supremacy. We want the oil. And right now it's the same thing. When we're talking about hegemony, whether we're talking about economical or whether we're talking about geographical, it's all about it's all about recognizing what it means to be in power. So you're talking about controlling. So when we look at Israel, a lot of times we're, thinking that if only we somehow would convince the administration up there that they're somehow not seeing the right picture. No, they recognize the picture. The problem is the politicians don't know and don't care about justice. They don't care about human life. After all, they don't even care about their own people to care about other people. They don't care about the real side of justice and to actually say what is really going on and who the victims are and all of that. That's not what they necessarily care about. It's an issue of, well, we've got our agenda and we need to make sure that the main agenda is Western supremacy. It's that easy. Whether that Western supremacy meant in Africa, or whether that Western supremacy meant in Asia, or whether that Western supremacy actually meant in the Middle East. It's basically going to the same block. It's controlling the resources, controlling the land, and in order to get the support. And here's one thing, is that why the media and why play that game on the media? Because the masses are generally good, caring people, generally. But in order to get the support from the masses, they needed to brainwash them. They needed to brainwash them to get their support, that they're actually doing it for a good cause, that they're doing it in order to protect the Western, they won't say Western, but they'll basically convince the masses that, hey, it's for your freedom, it's to protect you, it's to make your freedom protected, it's to make you a great nation, etc. And they won't tell them the truth. They won't tell them the truth. If the average American actually knew the truth, they would definitely oppose all of this, because they would recognize that the truth of the matter is people are generally good and will not accept injustice.
Are we united at the moment?
So people are generally good, but then they are the ones the politicians are the ones to
Divide us.
fool and manipulate the masses in order to convince them that what they're doing is actually for the sake of their freedom, and that what they're actually doing is in order to protect the principles of their government, or the principles and what they need, etc. When in reality, what they're actually doing is really plain injustice, just to protect their pockets, just to protect the money that comes in, not for the government, but for their pockets. When Condoleezza Rice, who actually owned a whole company, oil companies, same thing with Bush, same thing with all of those, actually owned weapons companies that would sell weapons, and companies, and guess what? They would make the government and sign the government to buy from their companies. So in other words, they'd be the ones to actually put the bill on who? On the average American. And they wouldn't even recognize it. And that's the same thing right now, in where they're playing the game, the media game, to convince the masses that, oh, we're actually here trying to protect the poor civilians, the Israeli civilians, because of course it's in order to present that the only humans are going to be, one, they have to be Western. They have to be Western. They have to basically be adopting our way of life, the secular, liberal way of life. Those are the only ones to be regarded as human. All the other people are subhuman. It is the same exact supremacy that happened historically when we had the African Americans were enslaved, when the different countries, different African countries were subordinated, when India, same thing, in where it was regarding that, well, they're colored, therefore they lack the humanity that the whites have, and therefore it's okay. Their lives don't count. The resources, they should not be controlling their resources. We should be controlling their resources. We should be the ones to determine how the resources are used, because after all, we are at a higher level of intelligence. We actually have the power, and therefore we should be the ones to control all of that, and we should be the ones to determine who's human and who's not. The same exact. If you guys can please silence your phones, it really disturbs me when I hear different things. I'm so sorry. All right, so enough of that. Just there is an interesting author who actually wrote about, what was his name? He was a professor in Columbia University. Mahmoud Mamdani. He actually wrote a couple good books in regards to scrutinizing this mentality on Western supremacy, and how in the application it works in that area of type of imperialism. Edward Said wrote a number of good books. Now, Edward Said is not Muslim, he's actually a Christian Palestinian, but what I like about his books is how he goes deep in studying literature and scrutinizing the works within the literature, in how it was designed in order to create an imperialist mentality within literature, within politics, in the impact it has on the modern politics or the contemporary politics today. There are actually a number of great books, but it's really important to recognize that, because what many students don't recognize, especially when we're talking about college students, is how the literature, even in school today, many times, or even in the media, is actually based on that idea of a type of a race that is superior to another race and therefore has the right to determine their humanity. 2, has the right to determine their rights, and 3, has the right to determine their resources, and 4, has the right to then determine their life and death. And this is important. Without us recognizing all of that, we may not recognize that our Muslim students, many times they would lose their confidence in universities and even on college campuses because they're not recognizing in between the lines the psychology behind that literature. The psychology behind that literature, and where your religion, your race is regarded secondary, and that you are somehow fearful of standing up for your race, standing up for your religion, or standing up for even the philosophy as a Muslim, whether we're talking about the definition of man, woman, whether the definition of human rights, whether the philosophy of justice, the philosophy of morality, and the list goes on, in where it is right now presented that the truth is only centered around the new definition, which is liberalism, which is the Western modern liberalism, in where many students are thinking, well, if I were to stand up for Islam, if I were to present Islam, well, that anyways is presented in the literature, that it is what is backward, it is patriarchal, it is already proven to be somehow against justice, etc. And then they would be shy to stand up for it and not recognizing that it's a new type of a Western supremacy that is trying to make you lose confidence of what you stand for. It's a new type of Western supremacy. It's a liberal agenda that is coming in with the same exact mentality, the mentality that wants to claim that it is different than the mentality that was the cause of slavery, that was the cause of all the different colonization. It wants to pretend that it is the new, and that it is the neo type of a modern West, but in reality, it is the same type of ideology, in where it's using the same method of making you lose your confidence in your deen, making you lose confidence in the philosophy of what your deen stands for, in your sharia, etc., and even in your race, and all of the different things, and making you feel that, well, I don't want to stand up for it. It's a new type of a same ideology, but a new way of controlling the hearts in order to control the minds, in order to control the bodies, to make you feel that you cannot be considered as advanced, gaining the privilege, having the privilege, until you adopt the Western liberalism that is of today. It's exactly the same idea. So you better be careful. Islam wants you to be free. Islam tells you, wake up. Because remember, Fir'aun, he used the same type of narrative. The same type of narrative. And where Fir'aun, what was he doing? He was basically telling them and trying to convince the masses that, hey, I'm actually trying to give you civilization, trying to give you power, trying to keep you free. And then Fir'aun was basically telling them, well, this man about Musa alayhi salam, that what was he? Well, I fear that he might actually change the principles, the religion that you've been standing for, or he might actually be the person to bring about destruction within the society. Why? In order to take away the focus on himself. And for people, of course, they're going to scrutinize. So the best and easiest way, if I don't want you to think that I'm the thief, I'll tell you that I'm here to protect you from a thief. That's the best way to do it. And that's exactly what Fir'aun was doing. So I'm protecting you from the thief, when in reality, he was actually the thief. So let's continue right there. We were doing with Surah Nisa. So we left off right here. للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون. وللنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون. And we were talking about the laws of inheritance. Now, one thing is that when we're talking about the laws of inheritance, it's actually a whole set of laws, but it's really important to just keep in mind that let me just share the screen with you right here, because it actually helps you understand a lot about laws. So in Islam, and I actually find
Is that a PDF?
It's not a PDF. You can find it as a PDF, but I actually have it as a JPG. All right. Now, one thing is that in Islamic laws of inheritance, you could see right there, and where the fractions, and I find this really interesting. Now, I'm not the best in math, but when you look at the fractions, they're really interesting in the way that they are actually divided. So you've got the only fractions in the Quran, and the Prophet ﷺ, remember, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Nahnu ummatun ummiyya," we're an illiterate nation. Well, that was because as Arab, they were illiterate. So when it came to math, arithmetics, reading, writing, all of that definitely was not their background, unlike the Persians. That was definitely the Persians, the Christian Arab at the time, the Indians, the Hindus, those were actually the mathematicians. They were the Chinese, they were called the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, the Chinese, they were actually considered as the best in medicine, etc. So I'm just trying to put you right there during that time of why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Nahnu ummatun ummiyya," but despite the fact that the Prophet ﷺ and the Arab were not the math experts, and definitely not the experts in any type of science. They were illiterate, not in any type of science did they necessarily excel. But the Quran, and this is really amazing, the Quran put these fractions on what would make a fair distribution in inheritance. So you had certain fractions. You've got the half, you've got the fourth, and you've got the eighth. Okay, now this is right there. You had the sixth, you had the third, and then you also had the 2/3, and you also had the 2/3, the third, the sixth, and we mentioned the eighth. Yes, we mentioned the eighth. So those were the only fractions that were mentioned in the ayah. Now, one thing is that it's rather a little complex, but it's really important to go back to it, and I would say scrutinize some of those fractions just to understand how division actually takes place. Now, keep in mind, when we talk about the laws of inheritance in Islam, the laws of inheritance in Islam are based on, number one, the closeness to the person that has been deceased. Number two, the life expectancy of that person. Now, it's not my expectancy or my expectation of how long this person is going to live, but the life expectancy that generally the person is going to be living for. So the son will inherit more than the father. The daughter will inherit more than the mother, because they would have a less life expectancy, that is the parents. All right. Now, The other part is the part about the closeness. So we're looking at the father or the son. You're looking at, okay, who's going to be inheriting more? The third one is the responsibility that is going to be required of them. Now, we're not talking about somebody leaving their responsibility behind. We're talking about the responsibility. Allah Akbar.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
All right. So the other one is the responsibility expected from that person. So it's not an issue of patriarchy, but Islam lays a lot of responsibility on the man and considers that the reason why, and the main reason why a certain, if we're talking about the same level of inheritors, what does that mean? A sister and a brother, all right? That the brother would inherit twice as the sister because the responsibility is going to be double. But the woman would actually not be in the same responsibility or expected to give the same financial responsibility. All right. These ayat are pretty much the only and most important ayat. In fact, they're pretty much the only ayat in regards to the laws of inheritance. So you memorize these ayat, you pretty much have 2/3 of all the laws of inheritance in Islam.
But we did some in Baqarah.
Yep, but this is the laws of inheritance right there. The only thing in terms of the inheritance for the grandmother, that was mentioned in a hadith and not in the Quran. Okay, so let's take the first part. We mentioned about the reason, and that was really right there.
Okay,
Can you please open the door?
choose one way to stay.
Keep it open. So the reason for this ayah is basically because the Arab did not used to give inheritance to women and regarded that it was the men that were bringing insecurity. Therefore, it was going to be the men that inherit all the other people, whether it's the other men or whether it's other women. They shouldn't be inheriting because they were seen as not the ones to give power. So it's a type of a nobility. In other words, and it was a noble system in where if I'm strong, then therefore I deserve to get the money and inherit the money because I'm the one that brings in protection for the society. And they didn't see it, that it's actually saying, I get the money, therefore I will take over the money by my power. In other words, they didn't see it as a type of an authoritative system, but they wanted to convince themselves that it was really based on a type of protection and bringing in security. So that's why this ayah was really clear about it, that no, the men and the women inherit. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ did not come in order to somehow act as a feminist, but this is the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet for men and women. It's not whatsoever a feminist thing, because if we were to say a feminist thing, then we would say, well, okay, then we cannot have the men and the women, but inherit equally. In Islam, no, it's not necessarily equally. It's a type of equity, but it is not necessarily as equally in all directions. All right. So this is extremely important to keep in mind, because Islam does not necessarily regard that men and women, that their rights and responsibilities are going to be the same in every corner, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it's a social dynamic or whether it's the physical differences or biological differences, or whether we're speaking about the differences in the psychological differences or their physical differences. Like I said, can you, okay, I can't do this.
I'm gonna take it.
Sorry about that, everybody. I cannot handle side noises. And of course, مما قل منه أو كثر, we talked about that. وإذا حضر, so we left off, يوصيكم الله في أولادكم. يوصيكم الله في أولادكم. This is in order to continue what was talked about before. إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما. Those that would take and somehow think that through their authority that they could abuse the orphans and oppress them by taking their rights, and eating their financial rights, that was somehow justified because they regard themselves as the awliya, or as the guardians. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُم. Now here's one thing. The context of this ayah, when you look at يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُم, in general, the scholars said العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. What does that mean? That the main theme in any wording in the Quran, بعموم اللفظ, in the generalized statement, and not necessarily one, in the context, the historical context that this verse or this quote was mentioned in, and is not to be narrowed down to the historical context that this text happened in. Got it? So therefore, when you see يوصيكم الله في أولادكم,
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله هيا على الصلاة هيا على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Go for it.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فويل للمصلين الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Mommy.
All right, should we continue? You guys want to pray sunnah?
Please go outside.
I'll wait for you guys to pray sunnah, right? All right.
Allowed to cheat today?
I did already.
Did she see you?
Keep it a secret. That's my boss. Am I gonna go to what? Yeah, inshallah. Yeah. Yeah, I will, inshallah. Yeah, inshallah. I'm just waiting for them to do their salah, inshallah, the sunnah. Yeah. Yeah, inshallah, that's what the ayat are really giving us. Alhamdulillah. No, inshallah, we'll stay live. We'll stay live here. All right, let's continue. Yusikumullahu fi awladikum. So remember, when we look at al-wasiyya, this is not talking about the wasiyya that is the portion that is deducted from the inheritance as a donation. This is not talking about it. This is right here a literal meaning to mean yusikum, to mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting you as and giving you that affirmation to be responsible and act responsibly towards awladikum, towards your children. So although this is a general statement, what does it mean? What are our responsibilities towards our children? What are the responsibilities towards our children? 5 things. Remember, number 1, the responsibility towards our children is 1, to maintain their deen. 2, to maintain their health and their life. 3, to maintain their mental health. 4, to maintain their chastity. And of course, preserve the family and all the different things that are needed. Number 4 is basically to maintain, whether we're talking about their wealth or whether the income that is needed to give them the maintenance, or whether we're talking about the money management in order to make sure that their responsibilities, or at least their needs, are met. What are their needs? The needs, again, the ones that we mentioned, their deen. So whether you're putting them in Islamic school or whether you're ensuring the necessary things to maintain their deen, whether putting them in the good neighborhood or whether to maintain their deen, you're putting them probably in different Islamic classes. And of course, this is not an extra thing. So when we're talking about maintaining the deen, this is even a bigger priority than giving them the clothes and even putting them in secular schools, or even giving them food and water. The number 1 thing is deen. To maintain their deen is the most important responsibility that you have towards your children and towards your family. That's the most important thing. That's why I always say, I'd rather have my children be selling spices in the streets of Africa and have good deen than actually be graduates from Harvard and doctors and have their deen lost. Because deen leads you to Jannah. But to get some kind of a privilege in this dunya, if your deen is lost, then everything is lost. Definitely it would be great if we could have deen and dunya privileges, right? That would be great. That would be great. But it's rare to actually find that. Now, when we look at yusikumullahu fi awladikum, this is a general statement. But then the ayah continues, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. Thought it was a wasiyah for the children. So why are you here making it لِلذَّكَرِ? For dhakar, the male, would get double the female. Why? I thought it was awladikum. Is this talking about al-walad? Is this talking about boys or is this talking about girls? So the word awladikum is a general statement for the girls and the boys. This is not talking about the boys only, but this is actually giving in a general statement that the boys and girls are supposed to be included in what responsibilities you actually have towards your children. But then it continues, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. And unfortunately, most people only know about the laws of inheritance, that the male gets double the female. That's actually a very distorted understanding of the laws of inheritance. Laws of inheritance in Islam, sometimes the girl can actually get double the boy. It depends on the situation. It depends on the things, the rules that we had mentioned before, the responsibilities. So for example, the daughter would get way more than the father, even though she's a woman, okay? The daughter would get more than the father. So it's not an issue of depending on whether it's a male, female. It's an issue of 1, the closeness to the deceased, 2, the life expectancy for that person, and 3, so for those that are co-hosts, please help me admit people. Okay, so you've got a number of different people that are co-hosts. So you guys use your privilege, right? All right. Where were we? And number 3 is the responsibility, the financial responsibilities. financial responsibilities that are expected of that person. فإن كن نساء فوق اثنتين, if they were more than one woman, right? فلهن ثلثا ما ترك. That is in situations where there's no other male at the same level. When we say level, I want you to look at it. There's al-usul and there's al-furu'. What is al-usul and what is al-furu'? Al-usul is basically where you're descending from. My father, my grandfather, those are usul. Al-furu', what offspring actually comes out of me. Those would be al-furu', my children, my grandchildren, and so forth. Those would be al-furu'. So if we didn't have a number of different inheritors at the same level, and we only had women where more than two women were, let's just give it a scenario where the father had, let's say, 5 daughters, no sons, then in that situation, they would all inherit 2/3 of the inheritance. 2/3 of the inheritance. What does that mean? Does that mean they share 2/3 of the inheritance? Yes, they would share 2/3 of the inheritance. And then we would basically say, well, for their 5 sisters, we would consider, well, we have 5 sisters, and we would have to see how many shareholders are there supposed to be. So it's not one law in each and every single thing. We would look at, is there a parent present? Is there a wife present? Are there children? Are there brothers? Are there stepbrothers? Are there sisters? What are there? Are there any grandsons? This is exactly what we need to do in order to calculate the number of shareholders. Once we calculate the number of shareholders, then we would basically apply these divisions. All right. Now, the cousins and, or let's say, other inheritors. So for example, the sons or daughters, well, it depends on they were plenty or not, but the sons do actually do what is called al-hajb. What is al-hajb? Al-hajb would mean that their existence would basically void the other inheritors. So for example, if the sons are there, then the uncles, that is the fathers, the brothers, they would not inherit because the sons are there. The sons are there, but the father would always, and the mother would always inherit. The mother and father would always inherit, all right? The daughters would always inherit. The sons would always inherit, except, listen to this. There are a number of mawani' irth. What does that mean? There are a number of different things that can be reasons why someone cannot inherit. Number 1 is that if the person is not a Muslim cannot inherit a non-Muslim, and a non-Muslim cannot inherit a Muslim. Got it? So if you had a mother that was a millionaire, you cannot inherit from her unless she gives you a will. Okay? Unless she gives you a will. That's more like a gift. That's a different story. Okay? But in terms of inheritance, you cannot inherit a non-Muslim, and a non-Muslim cannot inherit a Muslim. Number 2, which is if the person had committed a crime in order to anticipate or probably expedite inheriting. Let's say a person killed their father because they wanted their money. That would act as a crime that blocks you from inheriting your father or mother. Okay, so the crime to rush or expedite inheritance. We know that in crimes, right? Number 3 is basically certain situations where the uncle, for example, if the sons are there, cannot inherit because the sons are there, all right? Or perhaps if we're talking about there are some times where it's partial hajb, in other words, it's partial that the person cannot inherit, and sometimes inherit zero. It depends on the situation. So let's continue right there. So if we have a group of women, then in the group of women, and there's no male intercessor, and in other words, inheriting, in that situation, the girls would all split the 2/3 of the inheritance. But if there's only one daughter, if there's one girl left behind, then she would take half the inheritance. Half the inheritance. Now, keep in mind that when we're looking at inheritance, Islam actually tells you that the main idea, this is the premise, is that لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا. The main premise in the laws of inheritance is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, if you were to be the person to determine the fractions of laws of inheritance, you might actually go against to what really and who really deserves your money / your effort. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, well, you don't really know. That is the premise. You don't really know who's going to be the most to benefit you, the most to benefit me. Well, I'm already dead. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that the true benefit is not in this life alone, but it's also in the akhirah. Because this life leads to the akhirah. So just recognize your focus should not be on who you want to give as part of your wealth. You might consider that that person, I can tell that they deserve the most of my care. But in reality, your life is not just this life that you're living right now. This is just a transition, because in the akhirah, the Prophet ﷺ had actually mentioned in the hadith, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. If the children of the son of Adam would die, their actions are basically ending. They ended. There's no increase, there's no decrease. إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. The only things that would increase your good deeds are basically 3 things. Number 1, صدقة جارية. If we're talking about a donation that it's still ongoing. 2, ولد صالح يدعو له. A son that is making dua for that. In other words, it's an offspring, but the good is still ongoing. Number 3, which is علم ينتفع به. Left behind some knowledge that people are still benefiting from. In other words, the energy, whether we're looking at, when we're talking about sadaqah jariyah, when we're talking about walad salih, when we're talking about ilm yuntafa bih, I want you to remember, when we talked about the 3 main things that Islam considers, we said time, we said energy, and we also said money. These 3 things are extremely important, and plus add on to these 3, which is the knowledge. And we talked about how every single person is going to be asked as the first thing that when they enter the grave on these 3 things. And as a matter of fact, there are actually 4. The knowledge, number 2, the time, number 3, the money, and the energy, what you actually put in. Now that's the same thing. If you look at the hadith that إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من 3, in where you're looking at that, صدقة جارية, it's usually, in order to make a sadaqah, it's actually money. That's a sadaqah jariyah. Here we go with the money. Number 2, it's basically ولد صالح يدعو له. It's the effort that you put in raising a child that still is an ongoing effort. The implications of what energy you put inside this child is still ongoing. Number 3, the ilm yuntaf'a bihi an-nas, where it's knowledge that has until the time of today, and as long as people are benefiting from that knowledge, then that actually becomes the energy that still is ongoing to give the person the deed for it. Just imagine all the efforts that you actually have around you today, whether we're talking about, hey, look at this, let's just look around, okay? What is that? Who knows what this is? What is this? Look at it, read it. Al-Jami' li Ahkam al-Quran. Who's the author? Anybody? Read it. Al-Qurtubi. Oh, this is just one. This is one out of, I believe it's 21 volumes. Okay, this is just one. Okay, and if you look at al-Qurtubi, it's just one. Okay, you look at al-Qurtubi, he did all Tafseer al-Quran, and although I'm the one giving the class, but I cannot but remember and talk about al-Qurtubi. His ilm is actually right there, right now, benefiting all of us. In other words, we all are right now giving the ajr for al-Qurtubi. Imagine every single one that would hold the book, or even read from the book, is basically giving him that ajr. Every single one. Or even if we were to look, there are a lot of hadith in there. Whether we're talking about Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Qurtubi, what's his name? Or even Qurtubi, there's a Muhaddith Qurtubi, all right? And well, he did actually have in Sharh Sahih Muslim, not him, but another relative of his, right? When we look at all of that, just an idea of how much of ilm intafa bihi nas is going to be staying behind. Okay, now remember these three energies, and where and what are you putting your time, your money, and your energy in? Go ahead, my dear.
Regarding that, let's say the hadith, let's say it's from Abu Huraira. He's the first one. Is it like a chain? I mean,
it's a chain. Absolutely. There is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said that 3 would get the reward for one action. And let's say we're talking in the hadith, he actually talks about jihad, in where one is making the bow and arrow. The other one is probably fixing it. And the third one is using it. All right. And another one might have actually bought it for, in other words, it was something that they had invested in. So it's not one. It's not only one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will recognize every single effort, every single money that was put in, and certainly every single time spent. All right, every single time spent. What time are you spending? How much energy are you putting in? How much time are you investing? So all of you will also be included in al-Qurtubi's reward. And he will also get the reward from you for getting this in. So when you look at right
You can
there,
also collect all your videos and write the Aysha Wazwaz version of American.
Aysha Wazwaz version of what?
In translation.
Of al-Qurtubi, there you go. Now, inshallah, the Gems of Light classes, inshallah, will be going through certain books and actually explaining all those books, at least how they work and what's inside of them. Because the good thing right now is that a lot of these books are going to be really easy with a click of a button, where you could actually see the translation at least to a 79, 80% accuracy. Chat GBT, right now you chat PDF and you just put the whole book and it gives you the whole book translated. Click of a button and you've got the whole thing translated. At least to an 80% accuracy. Hey, 80% is better than before, where you got 0 and you're just looking at a book and all you could see is just, I guess, scribbles.
You mentioned the grave for those 4 things. How do
So-
I survive now that I know?
Allah, la ilaha illallah. So
She said it twice.
Shufi,
the grave.
I love it. I love it. How do we survive? A believer lives between al-khawf wa raja.
Okay.
Al-khawf wa raja, between fear and hope. if we're going to constantly just focus that, oh, I've done so much sin there where I can't ever going to somehow, cross to make it to Jannah. No, you live between khawf and raja. You don't necessarily just focus on what sin you had committed, but you recognize the sin and you move forward in hope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiving you your sins and granting you with his rahmah Jannah.
No, my question is, if you cannot answer these 4 questions,
Well, it's not an issue of answering, intellectually.
it's how you lived your life.
Exactly. So it's not an intellectual answer. We're like, okay, I've memorized the intellectual answer. It's an issue of how did you implement the idea, the premise that you will be held accountable for these four sides of your life. How are you going to be putting it in place? Are you going to be, did you put your time? Which is now the thing about that hadith, it didn't actually use time. It actually is something even more dangerous, which is shababihi,
Your youth.
your youthhood.
It's
What
gone.
did you do during your youth? Not when you were an older person. You don't have the energy to intermingle and do all of that. What did you do when you were young? When you had all the power, when you had all the privileges to mess around, you had all the privileges to do so much. Did you use your time wisely? What did you do with it? How did you spend it? The knowledge, what did you do with it? How did you put it into practice? The money, where did you get the money from? How did you spend it? So like I said, it's not an intellectual question per se. It's an issue of reminding you that those are the main things that you want to focus on, because those would determine how and on wonder what premise did you live your life on.
Does the punishment start in the grave or the day of Qiyamah?
No, the grave. The grave, al-barzakh, of course. Where were we? وَإِن كَانَتْ وَاحِدَةً فَلَهَا النِّصْفُ. If it's one daughter, then she would get half the inheritance. So where does the rest of the half go? Where does the rest of the half go? Then we would have to see the al-baqi ta'siban. Then we would have to see what other inheritors there are out there in order to give them the rest of the half. Got it? So
if you have
this
one daughter-
would be al-fard. This would be al-fard, to mean that there are certain things. This we've got determined for you. Okay, that's what you're going to take. It is an assigned amount. Then the rest that is not assigned is called ta'asib. That's not assigned, is called a ta'asib. In other words, we've got, she's assigned, she's getting half, she's basically fard. We've got a certain assigned amount. But then there are those, once I would have this girl, she's basically getting half, then where am I going to go with the rest of the half? So if I'm giving her half because she's the only one there, I'm going to see, does he have any brothers? I'm going to see, does he have any cousins? I'm going to see other relatives. Does he have a mom? We're going to see does he have a grandmother? I'm going to see then the other inheritors in order to see what I'm going to do with the other half. But for sure, she gets a half.
So if it's one daughter,
If it's one daughter,
no
she
other
gets a half.
kids?
What?
No
No other kids, no other boys. Nope, no other boys. ولأبويه لكل واحد منهما السدس. The mother and the father, each and every single one is going to get 1/6. Now, I want you to keep in mind, this is 1/6, not of the whole inheritance, not of the whole number. No, this is 1/6 after we would add up the shares. Are you with me here? So what does that mean? We would basically look at, let's say, how many shareholders are they? And then we would count the shareholders. And then we would say, okay, well, let's assume we have 20 shareholders. I'm going to say, it's a family, of course. We've got 20 shareholders. Then we're going to say she gets 1/6 of those 20 shareholders. Keep in mind that if they are brothers and sisters, that the boys would each be considered as 2 shareholders. Got it?
Yes.
All right. Each one would get 1/6. مما ترك إن كان له ولد. the mother and father, would get 1/6 if there is a son left behind. If there was no son left behind, then both of the parents, the mother would get a thuluth, would get 1/3 of the inheritance. Get 1/3 of the inheritance. But if there were brothers, then the mother would get 1/6. Does that mean that the father is not included? No, the father would actually get a different number. All right. But why the emphasis on the mother? Because this is in order to emphasize the importance of giving these women their right of inheritance. Their right of inheritance. من بعد وصية يوصي بها أو دين. Now, in these ayat, sometimes it would say من بعد وصية يوصى بها أو دين, or يوصي بها أو دين. We'll talk about that later. من بعد وصية يوصي بها أو دين. So, what comes first? The dain or the wasiyah?
The day.
The dain would come first.
Meher.
Of course. The dain, what is the dain? A dain is the debt. Il-wasiyah is basically the will. So why did the ayah actually put the wasiyah before the debt? Even though the practice that the Prophet ﷺ had practiced is that you would give the debt first. You pay the debt, and then if there's any remaining, well, then you would pay the wasiyah. And then if there's more remaining, then we would distribute it into inheritance. So in Lugha Arabiya, it can precede something that is normally less of its weight because of its importance. So for example, the ayah that there's nothing إلا صغيرة أو كبيرة إلا أحصاها. So it's supposed to be كبيرة أو صغيرة. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that there's nothing going to be left behind, not a small deed and not a big deed, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to calculate it or is going to hold you accountable for it? When we would know that what would make sense is that the big one is supposed to come first and not the small one. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, in Lugha Arabiya, you can put something that is less in terms of its weight for the emphasis of importance. God. So here, this is in order to emphasize that il-wasiyah is important, because many times people would regard it as not having the right importance as the dain. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this wasiyah that don't forget it. Don't think that, oh, it's a donation, not a big deal. But this wasiyah, this will, is to be regarded as a serious matter that must be recognized. Why? Because a dain is actually a debt that someone would owe another person, but usually you would have a backup. If you owe someone money, they would usually have a backup to support that claim, a legal authority, some power to help you defend your right for that money. But for the wasiyah, usually the person and the society would regard that this is a secondary thing. Why? Because al-wasiyah is usually done for somebody that is vulnerable. Al-wasiyah, the will, is usually done for somebody vulnerable, whether we're talking about an orphan or whether we're talking about the needy. Those are usually vulnerable people. Most of the times when the vulnerable are the ones given a will, most of the societies, most of the times, these people are not given the same recognition as someone that has the power of law backing up their claims. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing al-wasiyya for the vulnerable, that if it is of not less important, of any less important as the dain and the debt. In other words, the rights of those that don't have a backup to their let's say, right to be taken away, or at least their right to be deducted from the amount of money of inheritance, is going to be as equal as those that have the power and the power of law backing them up. Are you guys with me here?
Yes, but we still need a visual when you're done.
A visual? Let's do a visual one.
Like for the numbers when you're done.
Oh, yeah, sure. آباؤكم وأبناؤكم, your fathers. Now, when you look at آباؤكم, remember when we talked about al-usul and al-furu'? What is al-usul? Al-usul would mean me, I would have an asl, that's my father. I go back to my asl, that's my father. He's the basis. Then my father would basically his grandfather, his father, and so forth. These are my usul. These are my usul. Al-furu' would be my son, my grandson, great-grandson, and so forth. I don't know if I would live to have a great-grandson. Okay, aba'ukum. So when we say aba'ukum, in other words, it's here giving you that same premise that we were talking about earlier, that if you were to consider that what would make a fair distribution is you determining who deserves your energy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, as a matter of fact, it's really not based on your expectations of who deserves your energy, because people change. Because people change. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to emphasize to you that, well, you don't really know, even your fathers and your mothers and your grandfathers and all of those, you don't really know who's going to really invest the most in your life. What life? Well, anyways, you're dead, but it's in the akhirah. Faridatan min Allah. The laws of inheritance are obligatory, are laws that are faridah, just like salah. Now, very common questions. It depends on the place of the questioner usually. So we would have a lot of questions that would come to me from India in regards to widows. In regards to widows and what they can inherit and how much, and whether if she were to get married, whether she could at all inherit at all, and whether she has the right of inheritance whatsoever. So in Islam, yes, the widow would inherit depending on whether there are kids or not. And if a woman were to remarry, if a woman were to remarry, that does not void her right of inheritance. The only things that would void the right of inheritance is basically the crime that we talked about. Number two, if a person is not Muslim. And number three, what did we say it was? If we're talking about that the person himself, due to another descendant or ascendant, whether they are present or not. So if, let's say, an uncle is a brother, a son is there, then the uncle that is the father's brother is not going to inherit because the son is there. Because the sons are there. All right. So that's a different situation. All right. So when we talk about the laws of inheritance, it's very common that people would ask, well, what if the woman willingly gave? This is a common thing in Palestine, unfortunately, especially in the city that I come from, in where they would manipulate the woman and invite her probably on a restaurant, or tell her, hey, I want you to sign in order for you to give up on your inheritance, because if we are going to have a stranger, that is her husband, going to be involved with the family's property, then that's going to cause problems. Of course, in Islam, this is plain haram. But here's one thing, الساقط لا يعود. If you willingly gave up on your financial rights, if you willingly had done it, then you can't come back and say, well, okay, I'm actually going to go back and I want my money back. Well, you willingly gave up on it. Why willingly give up on it? It's your right. Don't give up on it. So in that situation, and it's really important to keep your knowledge in place so you won't give up on your rights of inheritance without you knowing. Inna Allah kana aliman hakima. But the Lord Almighty is aliman hakima. Alima, all knowing. Al-Hakim is basically all wise. Why all knowing and all wise? Well, when we're talking about the laws of inheritance, it's basically telling you, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the wisdom, and therefore whenever wisdom is involved, it's always telling you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at the broad picture. You don't want to see a very myopic picture and just look at one angle, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that there's another picture that you have to see in order to do and make a wise decision. The wider picture is not within a year or two, but it's actually for many years to come as well, in your life and even after your life. That's what wisdom actually means. That's the same thing for those that make decisions based on a year or two or three or four or five, and not necessarily look ahead 20 years from now. Those are basically the ones to be immature. The mature you are, the farther out in the many years to come you would plan. And you don't look at a small number of years, but you actually look farther ahead. Now that's wisdom. Same thing when you look at in terms of al-alim. What is al-alim? Al-alim is the all-knowing, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing in terms of what is going to be for the best for the community and on the long and the short term. وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِن لَّمْ يَكُن لَّهُنَّ وَلَدٌ. So if we had a woman, this is a wife, all right? So the man would inherit half of what the wife had left behind on a condition that there is no son left behind. We're talking about the woman had even if it's from a previous marriage, in that situation, if there is a son, فَإِن كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ, if there is a son, then the husband would only inherit 1/4 of the inheritance. And of course, مِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِينَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. When do we actually distribute the inheritance? Not until we look at the will, and of course, we look at the debt if there is any.
If there's no son, the husband gets how much?
There's no son?
Yes.
Half.
And then the half goes to the other bracket.
Absolutely. Then the other half would basically be distributed on the others.
That money is not even important.
What was that?
The money 100% is a woman when she passed away, that automatically goes to the husband, half of the money for him.
Yes, if there's no son.
What
If there's no son.
What if it's the daughter instead of son?
We'll get there. We'll get there. فإن كان له ولد فلكم الربع مما تركن. فإن كان لهن, sorry. If she had a son, then the father, that is, it could be his father, it could be his stepfather, they would only get 1/4. من بعد وصية يوصين بها أو دين. If there was وصية, there's a will, you would basically consider that first. So that one's, we talked about it. وَلَهُنَّ الرُّبُعُ. Now, one thing we mentioned before for al-wasiyya, it must not exceed the 1/3 of the inheritance. Number 2, the wasiyya cannot be given for somebody that inherits.
Yes.
They can't have 2. Okay. Number 2.
Well, she is the gift
What? Al-wasiyya is more of a
of
donation.
a donation. Okay.
Al-wasiyya is more of a donation, and usually there is something called wasiyya wajiba. Okay, what is al-wasiyya al-wajiba? Al-wasiyya al-wajiba, pay attention to this one. This one, there's a huge debate between scholars on this one, but I still have to mention it. let's actually draw this one so we can put it in perspective. Let's just say here is Saad. Okay, we've got Saad right there. This is the dad, Saad. And Saad, the dad, he basically had a couple sons. Okay, couple sons. And one of these sons basically died. Okay, he died during dad's life. During dad's life.
Okay.
Later, dad dies. Now, this son, Ahmed, he basically had children.
Yeah.
He had children. Now, here's one thing, is that by the law, Ahmed's children, these are secondary level. By the application, these two sons are the ones to inherit. Well, Ahmed died during his dad's life. He shouldn't actually inherit. Anyways, he died during dad's life.
No.
He wouldn't inherit. But Ahmed had left children behind. Those children that Ahmed left behind would get what is called wasiyya wajiba. What is wasiyya wajiba? Al-wasiyya al-wajiba was really assigned by Umar ibn Khattab. What is al-wasiyya al-wajiba? It's a will in recognition of the father Ahmed. And because the children that he had left behind, orphans, we would basically give them a wasiyya wajiba. We would give them an amount of money just to carry out that will.
What's the proportion? They're
The
not two
wasiyya wajiba.
shareholders. Their father's two shareholders, but it's not his dad. So what do they get? One shareholder?
So no, it's not. They don't get the same thing. No, we would basically do a different calculation. We would do a different calculation, but it's going to be a small amount, definitely not equal whatsoever to if he were to be alive.
What if he dies after the father? Like the
If he
father
dies
died,
after the father, no, he would get a full share.
that's the difference.
He would get a full share.
Like,
If let's do this again. Okay, we're gonna bring back Ahmed to life. All right, here we go. Ahmed, you're coming back to life. Okay, here we go. Ahmed came back to life. And Saad right here. He's RIP. Okay. Ahmed, before even distributing the wealth, all right, Saad died 1990. Okay. And before things were distributed, somehow they had a dispute and all of that. But then they only came to an agreement in probably 1995 that they want to distribute the wealth. 1995 is when Ahmed had died. Well, Ahmed's share is going to be preserved because anyways, Ahmed was alive during his dad's death. So in that situation, we're going to do two calculations. Okay, we're going to figure out Ahmed's share first. And then we're going to take that share and then we're going to do distribution again and see what who's going to be basically inheriting from Ahmed. Does he have any sons? Does he not have any sons? If he doesn't have any sons, we're going to take that share and distribute it off the father or the sisters or whoever is there. But if he does have sons, we're going to say, yeah, well, let's figure out how much your share was initially. And then we're going to take that share and we're going to basically distribute it on your children or whatever, whoever is going to be inheriting from Ahmed. Got it? So we're going to be doing a couple of calculations. The longer it took them to distribute the wealth, the longer these problems are going to be. And here's one thing. There is actually a very interesting website. I'll actually take you there right now. I love that website, although kind of sometimes needs some, let me actually take you there. And I love that website because it actually does all the calculations. It has nothing to do with Trump. Hold on. Nothing to do with Trump. Hold on. I just hope this thing opens up fast. Hold on. Did I? Okay, hold on. I know there's this very good website in where you would punch in all the different numbers and it will actually do the numbers for you. Let me see. Oh, this is it. So it would actually do the numbers for you. It will distribute everything for you and even by the penny. Yeah, it will actually do the job for you. So here we go. So you could see right there in where, let me see if I can actually get this a little bit smaller.
Speaking Arabic.
Well, I mean, it's speaking Arabic, but I mean, that's all right, but it actually does the job for you. Maybe we can one day probably put the English piece of it and help them actually make the, so here we go. We would basically see who the person died was, and we'll say, well, how much did he leave behind? Let's say $100,000 or whatever the number is. And then are there any debts? We would put that. Is there any will? Is there a second will? Is there a third will? And does he have a father? Yes or no? And does he have a great father? Does he have a son? Is there a daughter? Is there a granddaughter left behind? And then did they actually die before the distribution happened? Is there someone that died before the distribution happened? Is there wasiyya, which is basically the grandchildren? And did you want the distribution to be based on the majority of the opinions, on the Hanafi madhab, Maliki madhab, Shafi'i madhab, or the Hanbali madhab? Are you going to go based on the Egyptian laws? Are you going to based on the Saudi laws? Are you going to base it on the Moroccan laws? Are you going to base it on the UAE law, on the Kuwaiti law, Omani, Jordanian, Algerian? Which one did you actually want to do? And then you would basically click Hisab al-Mirath and it would give you by the penny the numbers. I loved it. I actually tried it a couple times. A little modification is needed, but I think it did an outstanding job.
Can you share?
Sure. Let me see. Are the people online actually seeing it? They are. So let me actually share it. So here we go. Let me see right here. So I got almawarith.com. almawarith.com. I actually loved it. Like I said, what I like about it is that it kind of gave you the option in where you can buy the penny. It will even explain to you, well, why that person inherits that much, and give you exactly all the calculation. What I mean by all the calculation, in where it will give you, in fact, it even gives you the option, put in the names. Ahmad inherits 200,000 because this. Su'ad inherits this much, and it will give you exactly the number by the penny. I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And of course, especially that it also gives you the different madhab options. This is unprecedented. This is the only website to do this calculation of what I know. So pretty interesting. Love it.
So Dr. Aysha, this is serious. We have to practice it in our lives. So I have questions. Please. If I have one son.
Hold on. Let me continue this one. It
But you're
will
going
answer.
so far.
Going so far. Don't worry. It'll answer the questions. Hold on. Don't worry. Where were we? See, now you're getting me lost. Hold on. ولهن الربع مما تركتم إن لم يكن لهن لكم ولد. So what happened? Okay. فإن كان لكم ولد فلهن الثمن مما تركتم. So now we've got another scenario here, that the wife or wives are there, and there are boys, sons, that is, left behind. How much does the wife inherit? Well, she gets 1/8. What if there were 4 wives? This person was really polygamous. Didn't have time to,
1/8 of
didn't want to save any time.
1/8 of all shareholders.
They would get 1/8, and they would all share that 1/8.
Oh.
Yep.
We don't need people at the bottom.
You don't want people on the bottom. Oh, don't just look at the money, Allah yahdik, look at the ajr. Look at the ajr. want to keep in mind, ladies, that when you're talking about polygamy, remember, the ones to really benefit from polygamy are the women, not the men. How? Simple. You guys, come on, simple. It doesn't need a lot of calculation. Who's the one? Who's the one? No, seriously, who's the one that is going to accept getting married to a man that's already married? Isn't it a woman? Why would she accept something of quote unquote lesser value unless she really needed it? Unless she really needed it, right? Every woman would want her husband to herself.
Keep going.
Right? Every woman would, I'm not necessarily going to convince you. Listen,
good. Because the woman needed it, so it's good sadaqah for akhirah.
What I'm trying to say, I'm basically trying to look at the whole thing in terms of how Islam views it. When we want to talk about the subject, we don't look at it from the emotional perspective. We don't look at it. When you want to study law, you don't study law and you don't determine values based on emotions. You determine laws and values based on rights and responsibilities. Who's the one to carry more responsibilities in a polygamous marriage? The man. The man. He's the one. How many people are married here?
I am, but I'm still.
How many people are not married? Wait a minute. How many people are not married? Raise your hands. Do it again. You guys are shy to tell me you're not married. What's going on? Okay. If you are between the age of 16 and 40, raise your hands. Between the ages of 16 and 40, you're married. Put your hand down. If you are not married and between the ages of 16 and 40, put your hand up. It's funny that they're shy of 16 and 40. Okay, if you are between the ages of 30 and up, 30 and up, and not married, put your hands up. So look at how many in this room? How many are in this room? You know what's going to happen? If we were to actually go in the men's side and do similar calculation, we're going to have more women that are not married. We're going to have more women that are not married than men not married. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's happening? If we were to see and consider that, well, the men are basically getting the privilege. What privilege is he getting? He thinks he's getting a privilege. No, this is real. He thinks he's getting a privilege. I come from a polygamous family. He thinks he's getting a privilege, but the reality is, man, is he paying a big price for that privilege or what? He's paying a big price. That's not just a lot of stress. You're talking about financial stress. You're talking about all the drama. No, this is real. He's paying a lot. He's paying a huge price for the children, for them. He's basically carrying a whole load.
Sometimes you don't care.
So here's the thing. When you talk about sometimes they don't care, this is not related to polygamy or not, because a man cannot care even in a monogamous marriage. He can just walk off and not care at all.
Personality.
It's not related to polygamy. It's related to the man himself. So whether you're going into a polygamous relationship or whether a monogamous relationship, you want to make sure that this man understands his responsibility well. You want to make sure that this man understands his deen that he's acting like a man, that he's committed like a man, that he understands what it means to consider the deen for the children, consider the deen for the wives. 2, consider their security. 3, consider their mental health, consider their chastity, and consider the wealth. If he's not putting it in place, whether it's in a monogamous marriage or in a polygamous marriage, if he's not doing it in place in a monogamous marriage, for sure he's not going to do it in place in a polygamous marriage. Why? Because commitment, it's whether you have one wife or more. If you're committed, you're going to do all your effort to actually be committed. I'm just looking at the idea. Do I recommend polygamy? No, I don't. I don't.
But I accept.
Wait. I don't recommend it. Not because I'm a woman, but for a number of different reasons. And this is not me somehow, raised in the West or etc. No. This is also a lot of scholars that had said that men had lost the commitment to act as men, and their deen had really become less. The commitment had become less. And unfortunately, very few can actually be committed. Then the idea, am I contradicting myself here? I'm not contradicting myself. I'm saying that the philosophy behind the legality of polygamy in Islam the idea in itself is not unjust. The idea is just. But the practice is where the problem is. That the Muslims, even our men, are right now really not doing their job in considering their responsibilities towards one wife, let alone more. And unfortunately, very, 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 very few men have learned how to shut their ears from listening to drama. They started getting absorbed into the drama that a lot of the small-minded wives get into, and they start getting absorbed and they start getting into it. It's not a fantasy and a harems to live in between. If you cannot be a man and know how to not open certain subjects related to this wife in front of the other wife, if you don't know how to zip it, then don't do it. Then don't do it. If you can't be a man, then sorry, lesbianism is haram. Simple. And the drama, just give me a second. And the drama in polygamous marriages are definitely a lot more than monogamous marriages. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. Why? Because injustice is a likely thing to happen in polygamous marriages than non-polygamous marriages. Wa alaikum assalam, my dear. Go ahead.
Hi, Ustaz, Jazakallah khair. I know a lot of people are married women. My friends, they don't obey their husband, and their justification is that because they're not like the Sahaba that Allah talk about to obey them and like what they do and to practice the religion. They don't do all that stuff. They miss a Fajr, or sometimes they lie, or all that stuff. So in that case, like they don't obey them. And I don't know, like.
Fair enough. Let me answer that one. So obedience to the husband, there's no doubt that it's actually a religious duty. The other day, the day when that thing broke up in it was on, was it Tuesday? It was Tuesday.
No.
Saturday?
Seven.
Okay.
Be careful.
Oh, be careful, exactly. So I dropped my husband off at the airport and then went to a store. And then a man, African American, he says, "Is it true that I can't date a woman that's Muslim?" Just a random question right off like that. I said, "Yes, sir, it's true." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because Islam considers that a woman is not going to be risking her principles when the man is in leadership for the household and risk obedience to the husband or even abusing the fact that she's very loyal to her family and end up risking her principles." And he said, "But girl, this is America. She doesn't have to obey no husband." I said, "Well, God Almighty created something in a man's nature that he's going to be the leader. He doesn't have to be the leader." I said, "Well, if a man is not going to lead the household, then why is he the man?
And he was a man.
Why is he the man then? If he can't even lead the household, then what's he a man for?" Then a guy jumps up and he says, "Are you married?" I said, "I am." And he said, "Well, where's your ring? Couldn't your husband give you a ring?" I said, "Well, my commitment," this is just off of me like that.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
So the other guy says, "Where's your ring?"
Okay.
And I said, "Listen, my husband knows that I'm a committed wife, and I know that he's a committed husband. Commitment is in the heart and the principles that you carry, and is not in a ring." Another African American woman was listening, and she said, "Uh-huh."
Isn't it amazing that he asked?
But subhanAllah, he said, "Well, what are the principles that you stand for?"
Okay.
It's like, fair enough. So the principles that we stand for: number one, the faith in the Lord Almighty; two, the protection of my life and your life to be sacred; number three, the preservation of our mental health and my husband's mental health and my children's mental health; number four, the preservation of chastity, and where I will not intermingle with any man behind my husband's back, or even, of course, ever. And he will not intermingle with any woman. Number 5, he recognizes his financial responsibilities towards me. And I recognize that those financial responsibilities, even when he's not present, I recognize that there must be a consideration for the principles of how I use the money. And he was like, I guess you're a lady of principle, girl, right there.
I think Allah
Never
made-
thought about it.
I think Allah made him rich you so that you could teach us
SubhanAllah,
today.
you know,
Right? I think it was
SubhanAllah, it's,
rizq for us.
yeah, SubhanAllah, it's, you know, they'll only give you a couple of minutes to answer. They'll provoke you with these questions, but SubhanAllah, it's very important that, you know, we would have an answer ready so that sometimes just hit it right on the head and nail it.
With the DNA.
With the DNA, there you go. Where did we go? وإن كان رجل يورث كلالة. With the kalala, so we've got a man, no kids, no sons, no father, and you've got other family, but no kids, no father. This person is basically there. He's got cousins, but no sons, no kids. No, we've got no asl and no fara from there. In imra'a, or a woman, and of course we're talking, or he basically is this man ends up, there's only a woman, he's got a sister or a brother, then in that situation each one would get 1/6. If they are more than that, whoops, where did it go? Oh no, I turned it off. Sorry about that. I actually turned it off.
So they might no kids, no son, no father.
No, yep, each one would basically, so we're looking at relatives, all right, in that situation, they would basically get 1/6 of the inheritance. 1/6 of the inheritance. If we're talking about cousins, but no other relatives, then we would get 1/6 of the inheritance.
What about brother? And what about the sisters and brother?
Yeah, so we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there, inshallah. Sorry about that, you guys. How do we actually get to where we were at?
Cousins is 1/6.
Yeah, the cousins would actually, those are the kalala in that situation.
What about the stepchildren?
The stepchildren, it depends if they're from the mother's side or the father's side, and it depends if there are other. So it depends if there are other people inheriting. Okay, if there are other people inheriting, then they can actually do what is called al-hajb. So it depends on who is inheriting first, and that can act as, you know, block them from getting an inheritance. So not always are you going to have stepsisters or stepsons or stepdaughters actually inheriting. It depends on the situation. It depends on what inheritors there are out there. Got it? It depends. So that's why it's really important to consider some of these things. That way you won't actually get lost in trying to understand the laws of inheritance. So you would know, it's like, okay, who am I supposed to be mentioned? What am I supposed to be mentioning here? فإن كانوا أكثر من ذلك, if they were, of course, basically you've got a lot of inheritors from the kalala, فهم شركاء في الثلث. They would basically be shareholders for 1/3. And that is, of course, after a wasiyah is distributed. أو دين غير مضار. Now that's the first time it said دين غير مضار. What does that actually mean? So a debt, it can happen that certain people can be selfish, and because they want to harm the inheritors, they would basically, you know, be lavish in the way that they would seek loans, because they would consider, well, I'll let the inheritors pay for it. So it was a deliberate move to harm the inheritors, whether it's the children or whether, so in that situation, we're going to consider, okay, well, that means you would basically have to look at dayn غير مضروب, doer with the way you would leave behind the inheritors. That would be hard.
قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. والعاديات ضبحا فالموريات قدحا فالمغيرات صبحا فأثرن به نقعا فوسطن به جمعا إن الإنسان لربه لكنود وإنه على ذلك لشهيد وإنه لحب الخير لشديد أفلا يعلم إذا بعثر ما في القبور وحصل ما في الصدور إن ربهم بهم يومئذ لخبير. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أستغفر الله أستغفر الله. اللهم السلام.
حطيته بده يفقد كده. Just so that I can finish this ayah, inshallah, because I need to close the live content with my phone. With my phone. أو دين غير مضار. دين غير مضار. We were talking about the debt that somebody might purposely get involved in to harm the inheritors. All right, that is number one, it's haram. But so do we not pay off the debt? Now here's one thing. There is a general rule in Islam, al-ghunmu bil-ghurm. Remember that law? Al-ghunmu bil-ghurm. What is al-ghunmu bil-ghurm? Al-ghunmu is basically the money that you would get as a booty. What is a booty? A booty is basically the money that you would get as a reward. Okay? Al-ghanim. Okay? Al-ghurm is the gharama. It's basically the money that you would be charged with. Now, just as you would be a person to gain some reward, you would also be responsible to pay for the charge as well. So you, just as, so for example, if we are to say you're going to be there when the wealth is distributed, you also have to be there to cover up when there is money deficit.
Oh, so when there's dain for the dead.
Absolutely. You're not going to say, I'm here when it involves taking the money, but then when in deficit, you're not there. No, when there is a deficit, we're going to tell you, we're going to ask you to pay the deficit. Got it?
Yes.
It's not fair that you want to be there when there's money given. But when there's no money given and there's a deficit, there's a debt on the deceased, you're like, well, I'm not involved. It has nothing to do with me. Yes, it does have something to do with you.
Do you share like boys take half?
You simply share the same thing.
So you pay the debt.
You pay the debts. You pay the debts, the children, etc. They'll pay the debts. All right? They'll also pay the debts. In that situation, we'll ask them, hey, you need to pay your dad's debt or your son's debt. If they don't have it, well, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. The person will be held accountable. The person will be held accountable, which is who? Which is the father or the sons or whoever went into this debt. They're the ones that are going to be held accountable. You went into this debt. Well, on Judgment Day, you're going to be asked about it.
Who will pay
All
the
right.
debt?
Is it vice versa to mean what? If the deceased, yeah, that's what we're saying.
Oh, if someone owed the deceased, I mean, who got the money?
Oh, the same thing. If the deceased basically had the right for money, okay, then in that situation, we can't say, well, the man died, that's it, I guess the debt is free. No. Then in that situation, you are to pay it back to the inheritors.
How about if they don't want to, the family don't want to pay the money?
If-
That's why we ask.
If the family doesn't want to pay, okay, who doesn't want to pay?
Like wife or children.
If they don't, they'll be held accountable. This is a dain. That money, they cannot claim the right over that money and say, well, we don't want to pay the dain, because the debt is to actually be paid before even distributing the wealth, the inheritance. You first have to pay the debt before even distributing the wealth. In other words, if a person and the inheritors were to take the inheritance before paying off the debt, then they had taken haram money, period. They had taken money that does not belong to them, period. Because paying the debt is fard. It's fard to be deducted before even distributing the inheritance. Got it? تلك حدود الله والله عليم حليم. Halim. Why Halim and not Hakim like before? Huh? In the previous ayah, it was Allah Alimun Hakim. But why this one Alimun Halim?
Because of debt.
Because of غير مضار. غير مضار. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Alim and he is Halim. But what does it have to, why غير مضار? And then here it's telling me Halim. Because Halim, because this person that died might have indeed intended to cause harm to the inheritors. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you to التخلق بأخلاق الله, to adopt the akhlaq, to the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself adopted al-akhlaq. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alimun halim. So be halim, be forbearing on the person that might actually have caused harm. Your dad, he probably purposely had taken so much debt. He put himself in so much trouble, and you would advise him not to do all these different debts and loans, and he ended up still going for it. And now you're paying the price of decisions that someone else had done. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alimun halim. You want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be forbearing on you? Well, you be forbearing on your father or your brothers or your sister, or whatever it is, who in order to actually pay back the dain, even if they really did it on purpose. Even if they really did it on purpose. Tilka hududullah. Those are the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-hudud, basically the boundaries, the limits. All right? Hududullah. وَمَن يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ. Whoever obeys in الطاعة, يُطِعِ اللَّهَ, obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would يُدْخِلْهُ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is actually a فعل مبني للمجهول. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make him enter al-Jannah, that where flowing rivers are underneath it, خالدين فيها, and living there eternally. وذلك هو الفوز العظيم. Why الفوز العظيم? Because many times we would get carried away with thinking that the real success is when you get the money. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, actually all of that is perishable. The true success is not in getting the money. The true success is in living the principle that will lead you to the true success in Jannah. وَمَا يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ نَارًا خَالِدًا فِيهَا وَلَهُ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. And whoever would disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger, and would, the word is يَتَعَدَّ. يَتَعَدَّ actually means to go beyond or to deliberately disobey the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يدخلهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make him enter نارًا خالدًا فيها. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala نسأل الله العفو والعافية. And where it is, they will live there eternally. وله عذاب مهين. What is العذاب المهين? المهين, humiliating. Why? Because usually it's arrogance. Remember, الجزاء من جنس العمل. So here we go. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, well, if you're going to be acting in arrogance and trying to somehow go against the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your arrogance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to humiliate you on Judgment Day. وَاللَّاتِي يَأْتِينَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مِن نِسَائِكُمْ فَاسْتَشْهِدُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةً مِنْكُمْ. Now, this actually goes into a different topic for the women that would basically commit. They would commit is zina, or they would commit. And then scholars had differences of opinions on whether this is zina or lesbianism, but we'll talk about it next week, inshallah. Oh, don't worry, we'll talk about it next week. This ayah is mansukha. We'll talk about mansukha and we'll talk about naskh next week, inshallah. So this ayah is mansukha, and we'll talk about it. And here, and also for the men and that engage in deism or any form of illicit actions, what happens to them. And inshallah, we'll talk about that next week, inshallah.
Can I ask my question now?
Yes.
I'm going to give you scenarios, just give me numbers. I have one son or many, one girl or many. Parent dies. There's definitely one parent.
Right, but
The sons will get 2 shares. The daughter will get 1 share.
hold on. Zamzam.
Yeah.
So we need to look at the whole scenario. It's not one scenario. So we would have to see, okay, any sons involved, any children, any mother, any grandmother, so we'll have to look at the scenario.
I need to look, you have to take us through all that in numbers.
Sure, inshallah.
Okay.
Inshallah.
Because this is important. We have to start.
So this is actually a whole class or a whole course. All right. I'm not going to give you all the course today. It's a whole book. It's a whole book. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just laying out certain things, certain numbers, but this is a whole course. This is a whole course. But here we're just laying out the ABCs. That's it. All right. So inshallah, if they're yes, ma'am.
The seeds left the will. Left out his kids and they inherit from him. Like let's say the kids were not really nice to him, the wife created a will.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Jameel, if he left a will but they didn't care about it, give them something, haram. You know what? We'll answer it next week. Let me see the baby, haram.
Oh, she's pregnant.
That's it.
Maybe he got it somewhere in the wall. He got it when she was great.
So what we'll do, inshallah, we'll answer those questions next time. There are some Somali families refuse to inherit. Why do they refuse to inherit? They don't want money? They said the family who in need will use and will remember to our father. You can only live, not get any money. So at the end of the day, you still have to distribute it. And if somebody wants to donate it, then good for them. All right, but then they still have to distribute it, and whoever wants to donate their share, that's up to them. So this is it. Inshallah, you guys will continue next week.
What's the link to the class?
Dr. Aysha.
Is that a
Yeah, we'll give you, inshallah, yeah. Can you give her the?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
All right, Assalamu alaikum. Yep.
حق اليقين عين اليقين والعلم